you who don't recognize my voice, my name is Ann Schaefer. I am the Senior Customer Success Specialist here at MarketSight. We'll be going ahead and going over new features that were released with our recent update, 10.8. We will cover those hopefully in about a half hour today, so we'll be able to give you a little time or day back. If you have any questions while we go through these new features, please feel free to send those in to us via the webinar. If they are generalized and we have time, we're going to go over as many questions as we can, probably just a few. And then any specific questions about a particular project or a specific function that we haven't mentioned, we'll follow up with you by email. So again, please do feel free to send in those queries as we continue. All right, so let's go ahead and start looking at those new features that came out with 10.8. First and foremost, as you probably have already noticed when you logged into the application, some site redesign was done in order to make the site more easy to use and visually clear. As you will note, the recent items list and other list pages in the application have been spaced out a bit so that if you have a large number of files, it's easier to read those, say, crosstab names and find the item that you're looking for. We've also condensed the home page here a little bit, so you'll see that all of the user resources, which were formerly in about the middle of the page, have now been moved over here to the user resources section on the far left. Everything that was available to you, so your help and documentation, for example, your training videos, or a copy of the workbook, those are all still available here, again, on this far left-hand side. This also brings up another new feature. This feature is targeted towards new users who have begun to use the application but may not know where to begin. You'll see that there is now a guided tours button that appears here in the lower right-hand corner of the application. The guided tours are essentially step-by-step instructions that will guide you on completing certain tasks within the MarketSight application. When that loads, you'll see a list of items. For the moment, say, for example, if I wanted to upload a data set, I would select that, and I would then see pop-ups appear on my screen to guide me through that. Of course, I can always close that, and there are options for the guided tours if you're interested in exploring those underneath your personal user options here. So click on your username, and then you will see, if you look a little further down, an option to change your settings. All right. So guided tours, again, intended more for those new users, but there are the option here to close it, as well as more options for those in your personal user settings. Now, let's take a look at some of the functional updates. So let's go to the crosstabs page here. All right, and I'm going to go ahead and create a new crosstab. Now, this looks very much the same as it always has, but I do want to point out that a new function has been added for MarketSight, and that is the ability to handle grid questions. So grid questions are common in many surveys. They often occur when you're asking similar questions, perhaps about multiple brands, for example. Now, one of the things that MarketSight used to do, say, for example, we have these recommend variables about several different wireless companies. They used to come in as separate variables, and indeed they still do. And the way MarketSight would display those would be something like this, where I would see the company name in my rows. I would see a rating scale for that company. I would see another company name and another rating scale, and so on down the list. But of course, grid questions are laid out slightly differently, hence the name grid. And many people really did request the ability to see those companies across the columns. That is now doable. So let me go ahead and remove the old-fashioned version, if you will. If I take a look down at the very bottom of my list here, I'm going to see that there's a new auto category that's been provided for me, grid variables. Now, if I expand that, I'm going to see a list of grid variables that are in my current data set. Grid variables are typically based on multiple response variables. So you will need to have some multiple response variables in your data set to see any options here in this grid variables section. But once you have your grid variable, all you really need to do is drag it over into either the columns or the rows. So let's say I'll take my recommendation variable here. And then MarketSight will go ahead and populate that crosstab based on that grid design. Now, as you can see, the layout distinctly different. No longer do we have the company, a rating scale, another company, and a rating scale. We have the singular rating scale here in the rows of this crosstab, and the companies are now displayed across the top. MarketSight is doing stat testing, so it is comparing the different cells, in this case, those different companies. So I do get everything that I would expect from a MarketSight crosstab, but now in my grid format. Grid questions are definitely one of the bigger updates, but they're definitely not the only update to the crosstabs. Now I'm going to remove my grid question and put in perhaps a couple of simple questions and make a simple crosstab here. Let's go ahead and I will place, say, my age variable in my columns. And let's say I will take one of my monthly minutes used variables here and place that into my rows. All right, so a simple crosstab here, but let's say, for example, under monthly minutes used, or perhaps even the age groups, I wanted to change the labels in that particular variable. Formerly, what used to be the case would be that I would need to save my crosstab. Well, that's normal. But I would also then have to leave this page and go back to the variables page in order to make modifications to those variable labels. Now, however, it's actually possible to make changes to those labels here from the crosstab designer. So again, let's say I'll take that age variable, and let's say I wanted to shorten these two labels here, make it a little shorter, more in line with what I see with the other sections. Now, all I want to do that is simply right-click on the name of the variable. So you do want to make sure that you get your right-click directly on that name. Then I will have an Edit Variable option. That will, of course, save my crosstab if I have not already. And I will then have the Edit Variable dialog appear for me. So it's the same dialog that I would have seen on the variables page, but of course now I'm still within my crosstab and I've not interrupted my workflow to return to that variables page. Now in this case, to edit those values, I will simply shorten them a little bit, say 65 plus, and I will put DA there. And I like to save the values just in case. MarketSight will go ahead and check for any updates as it normally would when applying changes to variables that are in use. As you can see, that doesn't take too long, so my updates have completed. When I close that dialog, I can then click OK. My crosstab will reload, and now I see my new shortened labels here at the end of my crosstab. So again, editing variables directly from that crosstab editor, very useful, especially if you do have a lot of labeling changes that you see in that moment when you're designing the crosstab. There is one last change that has been made to these crosstabs, a new feature that's been added. In order for you to see this feature, you need to make sure that you have a weight variable in use. So I'm going to search for my weight variable here. I'm going to move that over. Now that my weight variable is in use, I can go to the rows here. I can click on the options, and what I'm looking for is here under calculations. Specifically, we've added a new choice for displaying effective base. Now, effective base has always been an option for you under the Statistics tab when weighting is in use as a means of your calculations, but it's now possible to actually display what that effective base is. So I could say hide sample sizes and choose just to display the effective base here, click OK, and then that change will be made. So displaying effective base is the final change that 10.8 made with the crosstab editor. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and save my crosstab. As always, we recommend saving. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a basic chart from this particular crosstab. So let's say I'll just go with a simple clustered column here, nothing too fancy. But I'm specifically going with this particular chart because I want to show you some of the chart features that have been added in 10.8. First and foremost, I now have the option to limit the number of values shown. In a chart like this could come in handy. Perhaps I wanted to show the top 3 of these categories. Now, the way to do this is to first make sure that your chart is sorted. So by default, it's usually not sorted. You can simply select sort options here at the top, in this case either ascending or descending. Then once I have my chart sorted, I'll want to head to the Data tab. Here on the Data tab, I'm going to find a new checkbox here to show only either the top or the bottom number of values that I select. I'm going to type in 3 and hit Enter. And now MarketSight will show just those top 3 age groups for this particular chart. So again, you do need to make sure that that chart is sorted in order to have access to this feature. But what's particularly nice about this is that this is really dynamic. So in cases where perhaps I may be running a tracking study and I'm adding new respondents over time, my crosstab data, of course, will change. Now, as that data changes, whatever the top 3 values happen to be, well, they might also change as well. So as a result, I would see those changes trickle down into this particular chart here. So definitely a more dynamic feature than one might originally think. Now, another change that I can make that's been added in 10.8 is the ability to set a particular color for an individual chart data point. So perhaps I wanted to highlight the 18 to 24 age group here. Now, if that's the case, I'm going to want to choose this Format Data Points option here in the upper toolbar. This used to say Edit Labels. So the text has been slightly modified, but it really does have the same functionality, plus it now has a little color option there. Now in this case, I simply click on this lovely little color editor, and I can choose from any of these web-safe colors that I see, or I can input a custom color. So many of us, of course, have clients who are very particular about the colors they use, to the point where they might supply us with hex codes or RGB values. Not a problem, you can input those, and then simply select that value by clicking on Apply. Once I see that different color here, I click OK, and then that color will be applied to that particular data point. So that is now a possibility. Again, that's via that Format Data Points dialog up here in the gray toolbar. Now, last but not least, there's one more change that has been made to the charts that is very, very useful if you are looking to move into dashboards and put your data into dashboards. So, for example, right now, mean is displayed here up at the top of my chart. That's not necessarily, of course, a problem, commonplace for a legend, but I might wish to move that someplace else. Formerly, if I went to display and I chose to adjust my legend options, I only had common choices like above, below, left, and right. Again, perfectly normal, but of course it does take up a little bit of that space there. So in a dashboard, space can be everything, of course. I might wish to use my spacing very, very carefully. Let's say, for example, I wanted to take my legend for my mean and actually move that over here into this blank area, kind of stack it, if you will, on top of the chart. I can now do that. So the trick is that I select the custom option here in my legend dialog. That's going to turn the legend into a little object in the upper left-hand corner that I can then drag around and place anywhere I would like within my chart. That means I'm saving that little bit of vertical space, and that potentially means I can get much more into my dashboard if I do this for several charts. So again, definitely something to look into if you're working on any sort of dashboarding or are thinking about looking into designing dashboards. I'm going to go ahead and save this guy. I always like saving. And next, we're going to take a look at the dashboard section, speaking of dashboards, which is where another set of options have been added. Formerly, in 10.7, the older version, I could always create a new dashboard, and I could create a new template, but there weren't really any templates that I could build off from that were already made for me. How could I then say make my own template? Well, again, you could do it, but now what I can do is I can actually base something off a template that's been pre-built. Now, if I choose dashboard from template, what I'm going to see is a list of pre-built templates that the designer on our team has put together. These templates come in different color schemes, as you can see. So we have cool ones, we have some warm color schemes, some neutral options, different layouts intended for landscape or even mobile presentation, depending on where you think you might wish to take your dashboard. In order to begin working with any one of these, all I need to do is simply click on that particular item, say this particular template, and then MarketSight will go ahead and load that template. Now, these templates are a bit different from other templates that I might have personally created in that they contain placeholders. You can clearly see the placeholder that says placeholder right here, but I'm also speaking of these boxes that you see, these little diagonal lines. These represent little boxes that are holding space, if you will, for objects from my data set. So anything that I've made, be it a chart, maybe even it's that underlined crosstab or a data view, all of these items can be placed into a placeholder here, and then that placeholder is essentially going to resize that object to fit within it. To show you an example of what I mean, I'm going to take one of my charts here, and I'm going to put it in two separate boxes. Now, of course, you really wouldn't use the same chart twice, but I do just want to show you that effect of the placeholders. So let's say, again, I take my age distribution here, and I put it into this larger square. As you can see, that's filled in that space there. I have a fairly large chart, my legend to the right, and my title. Now, if I take that very same chart and I place it into a smaller placeholder right here, that same chart is going to condense itself and it's going to become much smaller in order to fit into that space. So what this means for me in practical terms is that I don't really have to think ahead of time while I'm working on my charts about the sizing. I just sort of leave my charts as is. I then place them into one of these boxes. They size to fit that space, and I'm essentially good to go. Now, there have been other updates too. I have this particular object selected. Now, let's say I had wanted to make changes to this chart. Once upon a time, as though that were so long ago, I would simply right-click on the chart and I would choose Options. And that would bring up a dialog where I could say change the positioning or the sizing of this element. As you can see, in my right-click menu, there is no longer an Options link here. The reason why is because it's really been moved right up here into the toolbar. Options is now located here because the Options dialog is now modeless, if you will. It is no longer a screen that pops up in the middle that you then have to fill in, hit OK, and then have commit in order to then move on to the next object. By being modeless, it's something that I can move around the screen so that it's out of my way. And also, interestingly, if I select a different object, what I see here in the item options in the properties of that item, that will change as a result. So again, it's just a convenience thing, but it's really quite handy in terms of speeding up your workflow when designing a dashboard. Now, there is one more major update to the dashboards that came out with 10.8, and this one is especially relevant for those of us who like to put lots of things on a single page. Now, I like things that are busy, I think, and of course, that's all well and good, but on a website, sometimes putting too many things can cause the dashboard, for example, to take far too long to load for my client. And I really, of course, need to think about what my client prefers and not my own personal design preferences in this case. So rather than, say, putting a lot of objects on a single page within a dashboard, I can cater to what my client is looking for by actually creating pages within my dashboard. Now, there's a new tab here, Pages, and I want to first select this checkbox here in order to add those. By default, they're placed on the left, but I can, of course, shift those over to the right. And then I could say move my dashboard title, maybe over a little bit to compensate for my new buttons. These particular buttons now enable navigation. So I could go ahead and say go to page 2. As you can see, those charts are no longer present there. And perhaps I would take my age groupings crosstab and place that into this particular page. Maybe I will take a different crosstab as well. I think 48 was the one that we just made this morning. I'll place that. And that's more of a wide crosstab than a long one, so let me adjust that spacing here just a little bit. Easily done, as you can see with clicking and dragging. Once I have the layout that I'm looking for and the content that I want, I can actually continue to add more pages. I'm definitely not limited to just the 2. If I want to add a page, I can simply click on the little plus sign here. I can also choose to copy pages. So if I really liked the content of page 1, for example, I wanted to repeat that perhaps, or maybe I wanted to grab that layout. I wanted that blue placeholder I wanted the blue title bar. I can easily copy a page simply by right-clicking on it and choosing Copy. As you can see, all of the items within that are now on my copy of page 1. Of course, I probably don't want this to be called copy of page 1, so there's nothing stopping me from renaming this something more relevant to what it may contain. So let's say, for example, I will go demographics here. Very easily done. Now, these can also be formatted. The gray and the white, I think, works well with this particular dashboard. It's simple. But if your client, again, is very particular about appearance, do keep in mind that all of the things like the amount of space that's devoted to this particular set of buttons, that can be changed. So as I decrease the size available to those buttons, note that they sort of stack on top of each other. Of course, I could increase it to 100%, as the case may be. I can change the formattings of the colors, for example, the border, the font, the button itself. I can change the color when it's selected. I can change the color when it's just there, so just sort of existing. And of course, I can even change the color when somebody's mousing over it. So perhaps this may not be the best color combo of all time, but you can definitely tell when I hover over the button for page 2. So much formatting can be done here. And again, it does make it a lot easier to put a lot of content into a single dashboard. I think it's also an interesting approach when dealing with clients who really prefer getting a PowerPoint deck, because this is really, if you think about it, essentially an online PowerPoint presentation now. I simply have different pages instead of different slides. So instead of, say, navigating by clicking on a slide here on the left, I would navigate by clicking on my different pages here at the top of the dashboard. And as always, these can be exported to PowerPoint. So you would simply hit the export button to do that. All right, so let's take a quick look at our last feature, and let's then deal with a couple of questions in our few remaining minutes. So I'm going to leave this without saving my beautiful dashboard here. Hope you will forgive me for that. But heading on to the data views. Many of you are familiar with data views in that data views can be used, of course, to edit things. If I needed to edit my data, perhaps remove an extra duplicate, perhaps. Data views are also now used for additional functionality. So if I have any sort of open-ended text variable, for example, I can add word clouds based on those. In 10.8, we've also added yet another new functionality to data views, and that is the option to export this data view to SPSS. Now, it seems perhaps a minor option, but it's actually very useful, especially if you have clients who tend to ask you for, say, certain variables or a subset of the data. It used to be that you had to export the entire data set, and that, of course, was not necessarily something that you'd want to give a client full access to. However, now that you can export your data views directly to SPSS, you can just include the variables that you think that client needs to see, choose to export, and then you get a file, again, with just those variables. So essentially, it allows you to limit that data that you would then give to your client. Now that is our most major update there for the data views and our last update of 10.8. We do have several questions that have come in, so let's take a moment. All right, so we do have questions about grid variables. If MarketSight does not recognize your grid variable as such, I would say probably best bet on that one is to reach out to us at customer service. There could be different settings in that multiple response variable that need to be adjusted. So we can take a look at your particular grid question and then tell you what might need to be changed in order for it to be recognized as a grid question. So again, yes, with grid questions, if you have any questions there, do send your example into customer service and we'll take a look and tell you exactly what you need to do. Let's see here, any other questions that are relevant to everyone? We do have an option, making custom templates. How can I make a custom template? Making a custom template, easily done. I would definitely recommend, if you're making a custom template for dashboards, to consider copying one of those pre-existing templates, if only because it makes it much easier. So in order to do something like that, you would create a dashboard from a template, select the template that you like. I keep on choosing this one. I think I might like it. But let's say, for example, I wanted this to be differently sized, or I wanted fewer blue boxes. Maybe I didn't want the blue boxes. All of those changes can be made. So say, for example, I can get rid of these placeholders simply by deleting them. So I get rid of those blue boxes as well. As you can see, it's simply a few clicks there. Then let's say I take that white box and I expand that so I have more space for that particular chart. So by utilizing these pre-built templates, you can customize them, and then under Save As, choose Save as Template. And that's what you're looking for in order to create a custom template. All right, so we have a couple of questions again about filters in dashboards. That's not specific exactly to this particular feature presentation, but because we're here, I can mention the way filters work. Just make sure you have a filter variable and interactivity enabled in one object within your dashboard. All right, so it looks like the rest are fairly specific. So we will go ahead and reach out to you about your particular questions via email from customer service. And thank you for watching today. We ended pretty much right on time here, so you get a half hour back in your day. We appreciate your time and your effort that you spent to attend this webinar today, and hopefully you found this Mastering MarketSight session useful. If you have any ideas or suggestions that you would like to see in further Mastering MarketSight sessions, of course, feel free to let us know. Thank you so much, and have a wonderful day.